Our party room has got to a position where we will not be re-entering a coalition agreement with the Liberal Party after this election.
I didn't think the Liberals or the Nationals could win an election without each other.
He says that this is a policy principle decision, not a personality decision.
Tom, it's so good to see you, and thank you for talking to us, because I know it's really busy as this breaking news is being covered.
Yeah, it's exciting times here. It's quite a crazy day, and not an expected development, I must say.
Yeah, so how extraordinary is this? What's your immediate reaction?
Well, my immediate reaction was one of surprise. It has been said in the past couple of days that it's possible that the Liberals and Nationals could split up for this term in opposition, but I must say my expectation was that they wouldn't, that both sides would have enough self-interest and common ground to stick together. So when this morning we saw an announcement was coming from David Littleproud and from his leadership team, we moved pretty quickly, and I must say when he confirmed that they were splitting, I was quite shocked.
What are the reasons that Nationals leader David Littleproud has given us for making this extraordinary move?
He nominated a few policy areas that he said he couldn't get a guarantee from Susan Lee on that led to this decision. They include nuclear power, the $20 billion Regional Australia Future Fund, divestiture powers for supermarkets. Those are the laws that allow big retailers to be broken up if they're found to be misusing market share, and some essential services in the bush, including telecommunications. Essentially, David Littleproud went into the negotiations with Susan Lee demanding that those policy areas be locked in order for the coalition agreement to be signed, as is usual after an election. But Susan Lee was in an impossible situation because just last week she agreed that there would be no captain's picks in policy areas and that all of the coalition's offerings to voters would be up for review. So she really couldn't give a guarantee to the Nationals. I think that's a big part of what's led to this split.
And when you say no captain's pick, what does that mean?
That's a terminology that has been used quite a lot in the last few years. It's essentially where the leader makes the decision without consulting the parties. Lee's position was all party policies across the coalition would be agreed in the party room. People would have the opportunity to comment and argue and debate positions before they were settled. The captain's pick label has been used where prime ministers in particular and opposition leaders have made a decision off their own bat and really not brought their colleagues into the decision-making process.
So Susan Lee has wanted to consult over these sort of varied controversial areas of policy. You've listed quite a few. How much of this is also the fact that the Liberals didn't do very well in the federal election, but the Nationals kind of held their position, held their seats?
Yeah, the Nationals feel like they did much better than the Liberals on the 3rd of May, and they thought that going into the negotiations they had a much stronger hand. They were already talking about how many frontbench positions they should get as part of the coalition agreement, and it seems like David Littleproud was forceful in that area as well as on things like nuclear, which was in big part led by the Nationals' opposition to renewable energy. It was probably pretty tense, and he said that it's the hardest decision he's made in his political life. The ramifications of this are going to be really interesting. One question that is outstanding is, will the two parties get back together in time for the next election before they go to voters again? If they stay apart, it could be fascinating to see, and it's probably politically good news for Labor.
I didn't think the Liberals or the Nationals could win an election without each other.
No, they probably can't. They would both, the Nationals certainly can't, and the Liberals are only going to have a small number in the current lower house. So the iron law of arithmetic, as John Howard always said, probably means that they're in opposition if they stay apart. It'll be very difficult for them to win even if they're together. So that would suggest that calmer heads might prevail before the next election. The last time this happened, back in the 1980s, the split wasn't very lasting. They were back together within a few months. So that could potentially be a way forward, perhaps in a year or perhaps sometime between now and the 2028 election. The two leaders will be able to say, we've got more in common than we do dividing us, and we should offer ourselves together to voters.
We are going to talk about some of the practicalities of that of that split. It's interesting that you say this has happened before, so it's a kind of a, is it temporary, is it permanent? But I just want to take you back to some of what David Littleproud has said. He said there's no animosity here, but they've been locked in negotiations for days. I mean, how much of that rings true? Was this like a hot-headed decision, perhaps one of frustration, or one that he might have been stewing on and sitting on?
I think there will have been some careful consideration. The Nationals leadership seems to be united on this, and Barnaby Joyce, the former leader who is often described as a rival to David Littleproud, agrees that it's in the interest of both parties that they be split apart. So I don't think there's a huge breakdown on the National side, but I think some in the Liberal Party might be frustrated by this. You know, there'll be views on both sides. Some Liberals believe the Nationals have held them back with voters in metropolitan areas and cost them seats. And indeed, Labor has previously put Barnaby Joyce's picture up at polling places in previous elections, knowing that voters find him a divisive figure. But I think some in the Liberal Party might be frustrated that this puts them further away from being able to offer themselves as a possible party of government at the next election. Probably some will be frustrated that it looks messy politically, that there's a big split. I suspect there'll be surprise among some Liberal MPs as well.
Let's talk about the Liberals, because we haven't heard from the leader, Susan Lee, yet. As we're speaking, she's expected to talk later. But do we kind of know whether this would have been mutual, or whether she would have felt like this isn't the best call, but it's out of her hands?
We don't know that yet. My suspicion is she probably would have preferred a coalition agreement. It would have looked neater and more straightforward for her leadership. There could be more instability that flows from this decision. Equally, it's possible that she'll be pleased that she can make policy within the Liberal Party room alone and not have to consult the Nationals. Equally, Susan Lee probably has about 9 positions on her front bench that she can give to Liberal MPs now and won't have to consider Nationals on the front bench as would have been expected under a coalition agreement like has happened in other terms of Parliament.
David Littleproud said this is a healthy part of our democracy, which we should be proud of. So it's feeling like this is almost necessary, given how divergent they are on some of those policy issues. If they can't agree on things, they really can't be a coalition at the moment.
Yeah, but equally it's possible it might have been sequencing here. There are people in the Liberal Party who believe in nuclear power as well and want that to be retained as policy for the opposition. It's possible here it's just the problem of timing, that Susan Lee couldn't give guarantees on the demands David Littleproud was bringing because she's promised to have a proper consultation within the joint party room and across the two parties, probably that was going to take some months or even years. It's messy, whatever the answer is, but it's possible she wanted some other outcome here, I think.
Does it make Susan Lee, the Liberal leader, look bad?
I think it makes the coalition look very unstable. It makes both parties look unstable, and that's probably not good for Susan Lee. She's only been in the job a couple of weeks. This is a historic split. I don't think there's huge upside for her politically.
Can we answer the question of whether this is existential? Because there's really key policy differences that you've set out. Net zero, climate change, nuclear, that's one I've been hearing about for days. At what point do we really start to say the face of Australian politics has changed forever?
If the two parties stay apart on a permanent basis, that will be a major shift. You know, the coalition's been long-standing over decades. There have been coalition governments elected with very strong mandates. If the parties stay apart, that becomes so much harder and maybe even impossible. So perhaps we'll have some sense of whether it's really an existential thing, whether it's a huge shift in our political landscape on a lasting basis between now and the next election. But I think probably we will get a better sense after that vote happens if these parties don't come back together. You know, we've seen splits within political movements in Australia really disrupt things. You know, the Labor Party split in the 1950s meant that the coalition could be in power for nearly a quarter of a century. if it led to that kind of result for Labor, it would be a huge historic outcome. But we're only just hours into this, so I'll avoid sweeping predictions like that.
That's true. This is a breaking news situation. It is unfolding. Before we kind of look at some of the implications in terms of how Parliament will work at the moment, I just want to ask about the personalities. Do you think this would have happened if Peter Dutton was still the head of the Liberal Party? Like, how much does it say about how Susan Lee and David Littleproud together interact?
I think it's possible the Nationals could have had more certainty under Peter Dutton. Take two of the issues that they've nominated here in announcing this split. Peter Dutton was very much on board with nuclear policy. He wanted a huge nuclear plan, taxpayer-owned, taxpayer-funded, 7 reactors built. That was very much in line with what the Nationals wanted. They probably would have been assured of that under Peter Dutton. Equally, Peter Dutton took on board the Nationals' position on supermarket divestment powers in the last term of Parliament and adopted that as coalition policy. There were people within the Liberal Party who felt that that was a very challenging position for the party to take on, and they felt that the Nationals were calling the shots there. So under Susan Lee, those are open questions. I think under Peter Dutton, probably they would have had more certainty.
Don't go anywhere because we've got more full story after the break. In the meantime, like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. I feel like you're going to be picking this apart for days and days and days. Let's just end on the practicalities here. So now the Nationals and the Liberals are sort of separate parties. What does that mean in terms of being a shadow ministry and money? Like, are the Nationals giving up a lot to make this call?
Yeah, they're putting their money where their mouths are here. They won't be on the opposition front bench. They won't be in the shadow ministry. David Littleproud has said that they will have their own spokespeople on major policy areas. So in that sense, they'd be almost like the Greens, a minor party putting forward a front bench, putting forward people to speak up on policy decisions made by the government. It's
interesting. I mean, in terms of the ranking now, so the Nationals are kind of more like independents or Greens. Have they diminished in stature?
They'll be a minor party like the Greens. They had more stature because they were part of the formal opposition, and they'll lose that. So I think they kind of go down a rung in that sense.
Which means they lose influence as well.
Well, that remains to be seen. They might be very influential on their own. They might find it challenging given that they had more kind of policy and political heft when they were in a coalition with the Liberals. Equally, they will lose some perks. You know, shadow ministers get a loading in their salary, and being on the front bench is a financial benefit for members as well. They won't have that now that they're going to be a minor party rather than an opposition party.
So the fact that David Littleproud was willing to give up all of that, does that really shed light on how intractable the differences are now between the two parties?
I think it may well. He says that this is a policy principle decision, not a personality decision, and it would seem like that's the case. It's a big political risk for him and for his Nationals colleagues, and history will determine whether it's the right call, but it certainly seems like he's going out on a limb and taking his party with him.
Okay, before we let you go, so you can keep covering this story, what are the next things for us to look out for in terms of how this continues to develop?
Well, the next thing that will happen is a virtual meeting of the Liberal Party. Their MPs are going to have a virtual party room meeting this afternoon. Susan Lee is also going to speak today. She'll give her reaction and explain her next steps. And I think it paves the way for her front bench to be announced this week. That means announcing shadow ministers to go up against Labor's front bench. That was going to take longer with the Nationals having to be considered in the mix. Now she can go ahead with Liberals alone. What it means after that, I'm not sure. It's going to be fascinating to see what kind of disruptive effect this has in the Parliament. I think it's going to be a bit more chaotic. Certainly we're going to have to think about the Nationals in a different way as we go about covering federal politics.
And just very quickly, does this mean Labor gets a clear path to do whatever they want?
I don't think they'll have a clear path. They had a pretty good path going forward. They've won a thumping majority. They've got the political momentum with them. I think they're still going to have opposition from the Nationals. They'll certainly still have opposition from the Liberals. But at least on these numbers, it's going to be difficult for the parties that were the coalition to kind of win an election anytime soon, Labor already were going into the next election with a big advantage. Probably this adds to it a bit, I think.
Tom, thank you so much for giving us your immediate reaction and analysis as this continues to develop, and we'll keep across it with you as the days and weeks go by.
Nothing quite like breaking news. Thanks a lot, Reged.
Nothing at all. Thank you.